And so now I'd like to get into our the reason why we're here today, our expanding our grant toolbox mornings on main webinar. And I know Caitlin talked about this a little bit, but we've done these the last couple of years, each kind of building on each other. And so we have not only these webinars, but all of our webinars are available on our YouTube channel itself. And so if you're looking for additional uh, uh, questions answered or additional grant related types of webinars, again, all available on our YouTube page. Please go and check that out. Um, but I want to go ahead and introduce Caitlin. So yes, so our speaker today is Katelyn from our staff, who handles a lot of the not only partnerships, but also managing the grants for not only our organization, but a lot of the pass-through grants that we're able to offer to you. For instance, our Paul Brun grant, she's our lead on that and providing funding directly to building owners that are looking to renovate their buildings. And so that's a grant that we received from the National Park Service. She's in charge of that grant and helping to write that grant and helping to administer that grant. And so she brings years worth of knowledge, some do's and don'ts, some best practices that she's learned along the way. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'll just turn it over to her.
Okay, thank you everyone and welcome. And so today like Ben said, I will talk about how you can expand your toolbox and add more to your grants. You'll be able to build off of what you have from the past webinars that I have done. And so I really wanted to highlight, as Ben shared, what we have done in the past. And so I encourage you to go find the webinar that I did this time last year. And on our YouTube channel, there are additional tips for grant writing there. I'm using and reiterating some of that today, but coupling these two webinars together will really help you, again, think strategically and expand capacity for your grant writing. And so really working through all of those and what works best for your organization will hopefully set you on the right path for how to integrate grants more into your organization. So I like to showcase this graphic a lot, pretty much in any presentation I do, especially related to grants, just because it helps to highlight kind of the ideal funding structure for a Main Street organization, something for you to strive towards, and helps you put into perspective where your grant funding should fall. We talk a lot in Main Street about how events should not be a major focus or the sole focus of fundraising for an organization. And I really view that grants the same way. A lot of times organizations will think that grants are the solution to all of their fundraising problems, and they're definitely a supplement to those fundraising needs. But grants come with a lot of additional requirements that can add some stress to projects. It can also add a lot of administrative need to an organization that maybe without them you would not have had to put forth. So grants are not the answer to everything, but it's definitely, again, a tool in that toolbox to be able to really have a well-rounded organization. And so this is just something I like to put forth for you all, for you to keep in mind and for you to be looking at, so that we know kind of we're balancing what we're pulling forward. So then this next slide, I wanted to highlight kind of the state of grant making and where we kind of see grant funds falling. I pulled this information from a survey that is done by an organization called Grant Station, and they are a great organization that does survey work, and then they also provide some free resources that you can utilize. And so you'll recognize this slide from my last webinar because it is a lot of the same information, just updated from the most recent survey and the newest information. The first thing I want to point out that they found that private foundations remained the most common source of funding overall. The second was government, or not, I shouldn't say second, but government funding from both state and local had the largest award dollars. So foundations are the most prevalent funder, and they typically can fund grants that are smaller, but then more widespread. But then governments are doing the larger, I mean, I always think of infrastructure projects or something like that. And especially if you're new to grant seeking, I encourage you not to get discouraged because you can't receive every grant that you apply for. It is very much a percentage of what you apply for is what you'll receive. And so I really encourage, and I encouraged this on the last webinar too, is to first focus on quantity and then focus on the quality of the grant and fine tuning that and working with partners in order to be able to provide that. So I wanted to give kind of a breakdown so you kind of understand where you may fall in your application process. And so in the 2026 GrantStation report, it showed that applying for 3 to 5 grants had a 90 or an 89% award rate. And I will tell you that overall, all of these percentages across this graph, this is the exact same graph I shared last year, just updated for this year. And all of these percentages fell. The percentages, I mean, just by maybe a few tenths of a point, but they all were lowered except for this 3 to 5 range. And so in the 3 to 5 range, 89% received at least one award. And then if you obviously go higher, that percentage goes higher. I do want to point out that I too feel like over 30 applications is outrageous. It is not something that I'm recommending to you. That is whenever you have dedicated staff, you have dedicated time and effort. And so, especially when you're starting out or wanting to even just enhance what you're doing for grants, don't think that you're going to get in that 99% range with over 30 applications. At the very least, sometimes it's hard to find 30 applications that really truly work for your organization. And so I would say, 64% obviously is better than 0% if you don't apply for any. So at the first step, apply for something. Get your feet wet on what you can understand of an application, working with a partnering organization, understanding what a grant funder wants from you, fine-tuning a project or an application. You have a 64% chance according to GrantStation. And then really work up to that 3 to 5% or 3 to 5 application range, because I find that that is a pretty good sweet spot, especially if you're finding consistently offered applications. You can get better about knowing what they're asking for, but also fine-tuning your projects for those applications. Like I said, focus first on quantity, then on quality, learning what they want, honing your process. And I reiterate it again here, grants don't solve budget issues. Unfortunately, in some instances, they may cause budget issues, but in the grand scheme of things, at the very least, many require a match. So you have to have some unencumbered funds to provide that match. You also potentially are creating, tweaking a project a little bit to fit a grant. And so that might create a little bit of extra work or something you may not have originally considered that would require you to spend more time on a project, or especially the administration of a grant causes more time spent. And so it can add a layer, and you have to weigh if that layer is worth it. I don't want to discourage you because, again, grants can definitely help offset a budget and make projects possible that were not possible. but they come with some things to consider. There are definitely pros and cons. And it does take a team and a system to apply. GrantStation found that almost 60% of respondents reported that 1 to 2 people were directly involved in securing their largest award, while 30% involved 3 to 5 people. So getting your organization committee involved, your board of directors involved, other, volunteers involved is definitely important. And then, of course, I think we can all understand this, that the number one issue with grant writing, grant reporting, GrantStation found was lack of time or staff. And so I think we can all feel that. I think organizations, they found at any level, any age, felt that just the same as new organizations or small organizations. The second greatest challenge was competition. There is finite resources. And so larger competition just created more need for these resources. So I just wanted to share all of that just to kind of set us off into this is what grants look like right now and how we can use that to think through the process for our granting journey. As Main Streets, then, you also have the tool of your transformation strategies, and you put forth this work, and we want to be sure we're utilizing them. And I shared this in the last webinar, but I want to reiterate it again, that you have developed these strategies through community input, and you're using them to guide your organization. That is a perfect thing to share in your grant writing, to show that you have received that community input and that you know what your community wants to see from you, and that's what makes your grant project strong. It also helps focus your grant research and your grant seeking. Because Main Street is a comprehensive approach, we benefit from being able to seek grants from a variety of sources and backgrounds, but that can also make it overwhelming and also hard to know when something doesn't work for us. And what I mean by that is we're always willing to tweak it just a little bit so that it could work. We can make that fit because it's just so close to what we're doing because of the comprehensive approach. And so our transformation strategies, again, just like they help guide the projects that we select for our communities, they will help guide your grant research so you know what you're looking for and what you should focus on. Again, they show the community engagement and they show that your organization has thought through a strategy for the work that you're doing. So throughout this webinar, I will share just some tips and kind of some tasks that you could take on as you're working through grants. So I'll talk through some resources for you to help utilize to make your case, partners for you to consider to use, general tips that I've kind of gathered since the last webinar to share with you and talk through. I will reiterate research opportunities that I have shared before, and obviously then encourage you all to apply. Even if it isn't perfect, start testing your systems and get those systems in place to then be able to test them and get acquainted with applying. I did want to make note here, like there's a lot of discussion of the use of AI in grant writing, use of AI in any field at this point. AI is a tool that you can definitely use in grant writing, and I'm not going to necessarily talk about it much today and like the ins and outs of it. There are plenty of webinars, plenty of articles out there about how you can utilize it and if you should and when you should and all of that. I encourage you to look into that and see where your comfort level lies in that. I do want to point out that especially for our organizations and the wide variety of projects that we are applying for, you will really need to help hone in anything that you receive out of an AI model and edit it and make sure that it's accurate and process through it. And so, just really take some time with it. So it's just kind of a caveat I will include with that. So the first thing I will really dive into is resources that you can use to help kind of enhance your applications. So some reasons that you would like to include that, it really does provide a weight to your project and your claims. In my last webinar, I highlighted tasks that you could do to help ease your application burden, and I briefly discussed some reports, but I'll have a few additional ones in the next slide, and I know Ben will include some of that in the chat as well, so you can have links to these. But including the outside sources showcases how your project can succeed. It showcases that you have potential partnering organizations, or at least that other organizations have arrived at the same ideas or need as your organization has. And I would say whether it is through statistics from these reports or even just shared goals, input gathered by other organizations shows that your project has that more widespread need, and shows partnering with those organizations, even if it's just in ideas. Including this information gives your project the context it needs, so it doesn't just appear as something you thought up kind of randomly and then you're just believing in will succeed. It is grounded in data. It is grounded in observation that is founded throughout your community that it could succeed. It also gives your organization credibility. Again, multiple organizations have found the same need, have found that have the same goals, have stats to back up the same requirements. And so that gives your organization credibility in going forward with a project. And again, tying all of this information to your transformation strategies that your community says are a priority will help tie that project to your mission and your work specifically. And so it's, again, just getting outside sources to support why you think this project will work well in your community. So here are some reports that maybe you hadn't thought of to use in a variety of different grants, and I'll ask Ben to put these in the chat for you to get the links of. I'll run through them pretty quickly. So Missouri Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy Plan. This is a statewide economic development plan that was completed in 2025 and is done every 5 years. So especially if you do any work with like EDA grants or any economic development, of course, the next one is local regional planning, CEDS plans or SEDS plans. It's the same level and they're required through EDA to have these plans. In both of the plans, they are both at the state and the regional levels. They're talking about small businesses, they're talking about downtowns, they're talking about entrepreneurship. So you can highlight that it is a statewide initiative that you are supporting at the local level, or it's a regional initiative that you are supporting at the local level. And that lends, gravity to your project. Additionally, Missouri's Comprehensive Statewide Preservation Plan. Actually, Missouri's SHPO is in the process of updating this plan. And it will, so the link I provided is to the current plan, which is then getting updated. And you will see a lot of, you'll probably see a lot of the same information carried over, but it really focuses on preservation as an economic development tool. At least that's what will be most relevant to a lot of your projects. And like national register listings and using preservation to highlight the history of local communities and why that is important and how to spread preservation through Missouri. So any preservation project that you have should reference this plan to show that it is a statewide goal for preservation in Missouri. I think last time in the webinar, I shared a little bit about Missouri Department of Tourism's reports, but they have their annual report and their economic report, both of which highlight tourism spending for one in Missouri, and they even break some of that down by county, at least, visitors or overall spending by county. And that can really tie into why you need a project, why you need a potential event that you might be applying for, how a like heritage tourist will behave in your community and what benefit that might have to businesses. And so that is something important to showcase for your projects. And then just goals and plans of granting organizations. This may seem pretty obvious, and many times the granting organization will ask you to do this, but even if they don't, I encourage you to seek out their strategic plan or their organization goals and tie your application back to those goals, using their specific language to tie into your project, because that is how they will see that you are an easy yes for funding. You easily fit all the criteria that they need to be able to support your project. And I want to put this in here to not forget to share your data. Obviously, you are the expert when it comes to your organization. And so as a Missouri Main Street organization, you would be collecting data to share with us. And so be sure you're using that data to tell your story, to show your impact. And that is the most accurate data that you can share as it relates to your project, even as you're sharing all of this additional data that helps in secondary ways. As Missouri Main Street, we have a resource library that could provide inspiration or additional support. Our annual report, as shown here, would put your work in context to the statewide organization. Similarly, Main Street America, putting your work in a national context for Main Street, as it relates to 1,200 other Main Street organizations. And then they also have a resource library, and they're also constantly doing research to help with different facets of Main Street. And so some of that may be exactly what you need for a project. So they have a pretty enhanced research division that is constantly putting out work focused on our network. And I really want to encourage you to explore other Main Streets for inspiration as well. National Main Street or Main Street America has a map that you can use to be able to find other Main Streets that are using the Main Street approach, and using them not only for project inspiration, so you could potentially just share that as a grant project because it works, but also any potential reports that they create if they're like size as you or have a similar demographic background or something like that. And also you could potentially see the outcomes of their projects and see how it worked for them. You could get in contact with them and see what they would have done better. Main Street is great of sharing, what worked, but also what didn't, what they would do differently. And I encourage you to use them as a resource as you're planning a project and then enhancing anything you do, but enhancing your grant applications as well. So next, I want you to consider what partners you need to advocate for or to enhance your work with them. And this will help you enhance your applications and show, again, that it's not just your organization kind of going off on their own, but it is really established in the community that this is a project that we're coming together to do. So there's a few different ways that you can partner as it relates to grants. Of course, you can partner, you can list them as partners on your own grants, but you can also partner on their grants. So being in discussion with them, working with them on any kind of project, going to meetings, just chatting with them, gets them thinking about you as they're potentially doing projects in your district or in areas where you could be an expert or a participant on their grant. So then they're doing the writing, they're doing the admin piece. You are reaping some of the benefits, maybe not financially, but at least it is reported and can be showcased as a benefit in the district. Of course, they can also provide financial or in-kind support on your grant. They can be a financial sponsor on a grant, or even they can provide in-kind, volunteer, anything like that to help bolster your grant project. They can lend strength to an application. So in some regards, one example that comes to mind is the Missouri Association of Realtors. They have a placemaking grant. And so obviously you would need a realtor to help you apply for that grant. Obviously, they lend strength to your application by actually getting you access to that application. But just showing that you have the sign off of partners could show that your organization has credibility again and is strong in the project. They could potentially provide grant assistance in writing or in implementation. Some cities have people that are experienced with grant writing and would provide that assistance. Many regional planning commissions are constantly writing grants or doing grant research and providing that out to their networks. And so those are great partners there. And utilizing their resource. So maybe they're not an active participant, but they, especially like a city, they may have access to certain data that they are able to share with you, or they pay subscriptions to certain programs that would really benefit your project. And they can share that with you so you yourself as an organization don't have to pay the large fees associated with getting access as your own organization. And so these are some potential partners for you to consider. I am sure many of you have partnered with them through other avenues as a Main Street, but also consider how you can partner with them on grant applications and through grant administration, grant writing, research, all areas. Obviously, your city and county governments are very important. As I mentioned, they may have those subscriptions, they may have access, they may have grant writers. And so at the very least, they could also have funds. If you have a certain staff in your city, they may be doing those larger infrastructure grants or those larger grants that your capacity as an organization does not allow you to write or implement, but definitely impacts your downtown and you would definitely need. And you can participate and be a partner in those grants and be part of the discussion in planning them so they really benefit your organization. Local schools, colleges, and universities is great for volunteer bases, and it's great to get community involvement. Not only the attendees of these schools, but they're, potentially for younger children, their parents, and, just anyone else that's involved in these schools. And then hospitals or health centers, you can reach a population of the community that may be difficult to reach otherwise. More grant infrastructure potentially, again, to help with writing or any of that. And then along with education, health has more grant opportunities, it seems, so that you could partner with them on. Health, the health field is definitely a field in which I see a lot of grant opportunities. And, that's something you can tie into walkability or your farmer's market or anything like that. It can be part of Main Street projects, even if potentially the hospital or health center or whoever it is has to be the primary applicant, then you're part of that project and can help guide how it is best used in your district. Regional planning commissions, as I mentioned before, they typically have people on staff to help with writing or at least research. They do economic development projects in the region, so typically they're also writing for their own grants and have more direct access to EDA funds. And then other nonprofits and social organizations, you can tap into their networks and their resources. Sharing that amongst different nonprofits helps take the burden off of each other. And it helps you assist in solving issues that occur in downtown that may not be directly related to your mission, but are impacting your downtown, your district, or your main street. But overall, as with anything in Main Street, it's important to build those partnerships. So as I said, whenever they're doing a project, you're at the table. You have a say in what happens, and you can help guide them to meet your goals as well. And then I wanted to share just kind of a grab bag of some general tips that I have thought through and come up with since our last webinar on grants. Again, I stated this a bit earlier, but be efficient in your writing. So many of these applications have not only a word count, but a character count limit. And I often get frustrated with it because it's like, it's like they don't even want to know the important information. I understand they don't want me to go on for pages, but it's like they don't even want me to share my actual project. It's so low. But they really want you to be efficient and tell them point blank, this is the project, this is the need, this is why we need your help, and this is the outcome that will come from it. And this is another reason I will bring up AI. You really do have to hone in any use of AI to be sure that it's not using that flowery language, because what I have found is it really loves to add words. It loves to expand and use many words to sound more human, and that will expand your word count, expand your character count. And so you have to bring that back around. The second, be careful of what knowledge you assume the reviewer understands about your project. My example of this has always been, for years now, even the term Main Street. Main Street outside of our network can mean a variety of things. Even within the economic development world, it is starting to be used in a variety of ways that doesn't necessarily mean the Main Street approach, comprehensive methodology to revitalization. And so I'm not saying to not use it, but I am saying be sure you define it. Be sure you discuss that you are part of a nationwide movement that is a comprehensive approach rooted in historic preservation and economic development and community revitalization. Or, be sure you're using all of those words, because those words are words that are a bit easier to understand across sectors. And so even if you don't use Main Street approach, you're talking about the Main Street approach. And so they understand economic development, they understand community revitalization, they understand historic preservation. And so they don't get caught up on what is Main Street approach? Is that like this other thing I heard of? No, actually it's not. Get all confused about kind of what you're actually discussing. An example of this, so recently I have been reviewing a grant on the Kauffman Foundation's website, and they specifically say, this is a quote from them, applicants should write with the understanding that reviewers may be learning about their organization for the first time. And this is for all applicants, even returning applicants. And so you need to understand that they are, using new reviewers. They don't necessarily know your whole backstory. So there's a lot of different tips here. Of course, one of them, timelines can get weird. Be realistic. Federal timelines often are weird in that your project is starting before you're technically told you will be notified. So add in some cushion of, um, planning, or be more flexible with that. Understand how your project will be scored. Make sure you're looking at past awardees for information, and know the deadline details. I know that sounds obvious, but know, how you're supposed to turn it in. Are you turning it in at 5 p.m. or is it 11:59 p.m.? We're all so busy that we just need to know these details ahead of time so we can be sure we're meeting these deadlines. And the last one is be honest. I mean, that is obvious, but be honest in your need. Don't don't pretend like you have it all together. You do have a need for this grant, and they want to see that need so they can help you be successful. And if you sign up for a grant that is more than you can manage, that is not helping your organization. And so you need to just be honest in your actual need and your ability, and hope that they see the impact it will have. And I'll discuss a little bit on research. This is mostly repeating and sharing again what I had shared in the previous webinar, but I wanted just to highlight it again really quick. So we have our Main Street Grant Resource Directory that we send out monthly. For those that are investors in MMSC, you have access to the grant calendar on our website that has information on open and closed dates, potential webinars that are available for upcoming grants. And again, those regional planning commissioners potentially offer research assistance. And I mentioned Grant Station, they do have a free newsletter. It is good if you are looking for a wide variety of grant opportunities. They do cover a much larger variety than obviously our newsletter would. And so that is something for you to look into if you're interested. I'll kind of move again quickly through these as they are also repeats, but I have a few new kind of grant next steps for you to consider. And I'll have Ben put those links in the chat as well. Each time I do these webinars, I hope to kind of share with you grants that are a little bit easy wins, and maybe they will work for your project and work for something that you have upcoming, and at least to get on your calendar and get you kind of thinking about what might work for a project. Many of these are offered multiple times a year, and so you can try multiple times to do applications to them. I do want to point out here the Levitt Foundation. First, I want to say congratulations to Delmar Main Street, who was a recipient of the Levitt Foundation Vibe Grant last year. And so they're doing the concert series that it provides throughout the next 3 years. Levitt Foundation is a great one. They do provide these periodically. It's not on an annual basis. So it said the next grant cycle opens 2028. But there's a lot of information on their website, and so you can get prepared for the application. And so again, this is all information on these next couple slides, this slide and the next, that I have shared before. Missouri Arts Council, Humanities Council. Be sure to consider local large employers and if they have kind of a foundation to provide grants. The National Trust, I encourage you to look into their grants for historic preservation projects. They specifically have funds for Missouri specifically, and so they are funding grants based in Missouri. And the Walmart Foundation accepts on a quarterly basis. All of these grants, once they are open, are included in our grant resource directory monthly. And so that is a way that you can be aware of them as they come up. So here are a few that maybe I haven't mentioned or haven't highlighted as much before, and these are what Ben will share in the chat. The Casey's General Store donation request. So it is just a donation request, but you do have to fill out a form and kind of tell them what you'd like to use it for. I know Marceline has used this a fair bit. And it is an ongoing request, and it is for similar to Walmart, you request it from like your local Casey's. And we know that Casey's are pretty prevalent in a lot of our main streets. And so that's something for you to consider. Then the Google Ads grants, we talk about this a lot in various meetings that we've had, but you apply for Google for nonprofit account. And then if approved, you have access, it said to up to $10,000 per month in search ads shown on google.com. So you have to get access to through Google for nonprofit, and then you would be able to get access to the ads. And then the Jeffries Family Foundation, they are a foundation that covers multiple Midwestern states and focus on historic preservation. And so you would start with the Jeffries Heartland Fund, and it is focused, like I said, on preservation and a historic structures report. So if you have a national register listed building, it does need to be individually listed or eligible for individual listing. And they would assist you with doing a historic structures report. They are focused on rural areas, so that's something to keep in mind. And through the Heartland Fund, they help you develop a historic structures report. And then from that report, you would potentially be invited to participate in a capital campaign challenge grant. And so it is kind of a longer process to be able to have access to capital funds for a historic preservation project, but it is something that is available out there. And then I encourage you to seek out local foundations or local community foundations, regional community foundations, because I know some of our communities have had success in assistance through them as well. And I mentioned it a couple times, but I do want to make one last plug for our grant resource directory to highlight our monthly newsletter that provides grant opportunities that are available, kind of helps cut down the research process. And I encourage you to go to our website and get signed up for that if you have not already. Okay, and that is everything I had. So we can ask or answer some questions now.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, so as Caitlin said, go ahead and put your questions into the chat. There's been great discussion as we've been going through it. So I've jotted down a couple of notes just from things that people had put in the chat. One of them is that I mean, we talked about this a little bit. I know Caitlin said she wasn't going to get into it, but make sure AI is a tool. It isn't the end all be all. You should never just be like, put it into AI and submit the grant report because there are many times where it's like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. That isn't who we are as an organization. And so it pulls from a lot of good resources, but it's a starting point. It's not the end point. It is, I'm having a hard time starting this narrative. You have to have a very keen, watchful eye and really edit it and use your own voice in it as well. And so use it to help, like I said, start the conversation, but not be the ending point of that conversation. You still need to be as a human be the ending point for that grant application. There was a comment in there too about um, they like including a lot of data in grant applications, and that's great. Again, that's the reason why it's one of the reasons why we ask you to collect that data. Is to be able to use it not only for yourself as a local level to show your impact as a Main Street organization and the impact of investment in your downtown, but to use it for grant applications. But like Caitlin said, really try to hone in on what the grantor is looking for. And so if they're specifically looking for jobs and businesses opened, make sure to really hammer those and really drive that point home that we are an economic development organization and here is the jobs and the businesses that have been created over the past 3, 4, 5 years. And
Mm-hmm.
so don't just put, this is just me talking, don't just put data in there for the sake of putting data in there. but really try to emphasize what they're looking for as part of your application. Again, it goes right back to make sure you understand who you are applying for the grant and make sure you understand the organization in which you are applying for. Um, then,
One thing I will
but
add to that too, it's a talking point that we like to add in our grants as well. Obviously, as a state organization, and we have access to multiple years, obviously our entire 20-year history of this data. But and obviously, if you have a specific question about data in any time, but obviously for grants too, reach out to us and we're more than happy to share that. But something that we use a lot in our grants is the fact that Main Street communities weather economic downturn better than other communities. And so we can see, job creation through the small business job creation, or at least retention through the pandemic, or we even go back so far as the Great Recession. And so we can kind of use that as a talking point. And obviously we do that whenever it is relevant, but we also then are adding that story piece to the data. We're not just saying like, hey, here's 20 years of data on jobs, do with it what you will. We are saying like, we have analyzed this data and this is what we have found because of it, and encourage you um, to really do the same with your data. You know your community and what the data tells the story of.
we had a question in the chat, and this actually plays right into what I was about to put in there. It says, what's a creative way to attract attention within your community to collecting data? We actually did a webinar on this not too long ago about not just using the raw data at a local level, um, and many times it goes into storytelling. There are going to be people, public officials, people within your community that love to see just the numbers. They like to see how many jobs are created, how many businesses were created, what's the economic value of the volunteer hours that were given to the organization. But there are going to be people on the other side of that coin. It is, yes, perfect. Our city council, LOL. Yes, exactly. That's many times that audience that is looking for that. But many times it's what's behind the data. What's the story? Why did that business start in downtown? Why do they choose now in order to start their business and to put that sweat equity, that financial equity into doing that? And so actually we brought in someone that we've used in a lot of our communities, Ben Mordeau, to talk about how do we actually take this data and turn it into a story that we can tell. We've done a lot of work over these last couple of years on storytelling and how to create those stories that are going to be impactful in your community and how that can add validity to you as a Main Street organization and get people excited about downtown revitalization work. And so I would take a look. I just put into the chat a link to our YouTube page. So I mentioned earlier, all of these past webinars that we've done on grant writing are in there too. But there is some really good material on storytelling and taking that data a step further. So one last question, and I'll wait for any more questions to come in here. One question that I had, Caitlin, for you is we have a lot of either new communities that are on this webinar or new to an organization that's been around for a while, but they're new to the organization, whether it's a new staff member or whether it's a new volunteer. Um, what I have found is working with new communities is that they get overwhelmed immediately. They're like, you know what, we we have our plan, but we're overwhelmed with even where to start with grants, and we're not sure. It's daunting, and so they just don't do it, and so they have a hard time funding some of the things that they're wanting to do because they just get so overwhelmed with it. So where do you suggest, again, new organizations, new people to the organization, where do you suggest that they start when they're, I mean, just starting this journey of starting to write grants for the organization?
Absolutely. So I have a few different answers to this. So I would say that when you're first starting to understand the grant process, and whenever you're first starting to dive into research for grants, I personally So obviously you have to fine tune this best to yourself and your organization. I work best on a calendar method. And so that's why we developed the calendar, the Google Calendar on our website. But a lot of these grants come up annually, even though they might not happen at exactly, July 1 every year, they happen pretty much the same time. And so even if you're not yet ready to apply, I really encourage everyone to start looking at grants and start researching. With that, I would say just really reviewing the grant resource directory that we put out because we really pull in everything that would help Main Street organizations. There are some organizations or some grants out there that you would find because you need specific things for your projects that maybe we don't pull in, but we focus on the comprehensive Main Street approach. So start research with the grant resource directory. Even if you're not ready to apply yet, kind of keep in mind, hey, this happens in June or July every year. This happens in September. Start making yourself a calendar or start just paying attention to the calendar and knowing what could be upcoming. And then as you're getting into your end of year or beginning of year planning, you can help kind of plan out grants with projects. And again, I would really start slow, start easy. Those easy win slides that I shared that'll be in the recording and that we, of course, can share if you reach out. Those are the best ones because they have simple applications and they have multiple opportunities per year to apply. And then start working through those to get yourself familiarized with it.
Mhm.
When you're actually applying, I always say start with the budget. Like you need to know generally what your project is, but the budget will tell you, you know, I actually can't do this extra part that I really want to do, but it's just not the main goal and not the main focus. So I need to just hone this in a little bit more and focus on what will be covered by the grant budget. And then you can build out your narrative from there.
Absolutely. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and end it on that. We are 1 minute shy of 10 o'clock. And so, with that, thank you everyone for joining us for another Mornings on Main webinar. Like I said, our next one is on September 1st. We're going to be talking about, again, intentionality, which, if you know me, that's my favorite word, intentionality with board elections. And so, be sure to sign up for that on our website. And until then, have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.